Take it away, T.
Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Today's Security Unlocked webinar, we are going to dive into Sysmon, gaining some visibility into your enterprise. Today we've got special guest, Alan Stakalaskas. I had to have done better than Paul on that one. Let's go with that. He's a continuous monitoring specialist, threat hunter, and incident responder. And we also have the privilege of having Amanda Berlin. Now, is it Berlin or Berlin?
Right, either way, it's fine.
Okay, perfect. Yes, she's a lead incident detection engineer at Blumera. She also runs the mental health hackers and cybersecurity conference training. So anybody is looking for some tabletop training and some amazing mental health, Amanda is the mental health expert. She keeps us all sane most days.
I don't know about that, but
we're very excited to have both of you guys extreme experts in this subject, and it's going to be a real fun webinar where we dive into some of the visibility challenges, some of the things that Sysmon's going to help us with, and really dive into how an enterprise can get some better visibility with what you have today. Most of this is free, so it does help quite a bit from a return on investment standpoint. Stay tuned as well for our giveaway. We will have a question today with a $100 gift card from Hacker Warehouse. We appreciate the sponsorship there. So stay tuned, hop in on our Discord. The invite is in the webinar if you've not already joined that, and we will drop the question in there at some point today. So with that, I will kick it over to Alan and let's get started.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks everybody for attending. This is going to be Sysmon. We're going to be getting some visibility. So who am I? My name's Alan Stachelauskas or Alan Stekalakis, depending on what part of the country you're from. Self-employed consultant, 3 cats, 1 bunny, a couple degrees, handful of certifications. There we are, 3 cats, 1 bunny, and our matching Christmas pajamas. So this talk, we're subtitled visibility. So, you know, where is the logical place to gain visibility in your enterprise, right? How do we gain visibility, right? We hear these new terms, micro segmentation, micro perimeters, right? Zero trust. And this concept isn't anything new. If you're going to try to detect an infection in your environment, you want to do so at the closest point to the initial infection you want to. And the way you do that in a Windows environment is Sysmon. Sysmon's been around for a while. And it's a sysinternal tool put out by all those good guys over there. So what is Sysmon? So Sysmon is a guard cat or a guard dog for Windows. And if there's one thing you can appreciate about this talk is that those are cats guarding a window, right? So it gives you this visibility that a lot of these commercial EDR solutions, you know, say they give you, and it's free to set up. But if you're going to record so what does it actually record? So if you're going to say to me, say, Alan, blue teamer, you're a threat hunter, what are the things you want to gather? What are the data points you want? And I would say stuff like process creation, network connections creation from an endpoint standpoint. What processes are creating those network connections? Registry key, files, files created, drivers loaded, modules loaded, all those good stuff, having all these great data points. And Sysmon does this for you. The problem with this is it can create a lot of noise, and which can be problematic at certain points. Having I want to gather everything, but I don't want to look at everything, right? So we can create these configuration files to tune down the noise, and this is very important from a resource standpoint. A lot of your SIM tools charge you by how much you actually index or ingest, but also from a resource standpoint from you, like somebody has to look at all these events, and also from a system standpoint too, right? If you have a ton of events in your SIM or into your log collector, it's going to take a longer time to parse through that from a resource standpoint. So you either have to buy bigger servers or bigger EC2 instances, which can be problematic, right? So we're going to talk about how to create a configuration file. We'll walk through it.
Does that filtering actually happen at the endpoint with the configuration file, or is that your event log forwarder or your beat servers? Yeah,
that's going to actually, great question, right? So that's going to actually be on the endpoint itself, right? And we'll show you when you install it and how you reference this configuration file. But yes, it will be on the endpoint. So you won't even gather these, right? So as far as your data shipper or your whatever you're using, WinLog Beats, or we'll talk about source initiated subscriptions here. You don't have to tune it there. You're actually tuning it on the endpoint itself. So these won't even be logged. Swift on security, great resource. Take a look if you want to learn about configuration files, but we'll walk through them here. So first, we're going to start with our Sysmon schema version, or our Sysmon tag, right? We're going to specify a schema version. The schema version can be the same version or independent of your binary version. You want to make sure, I like keeping it at the lowest possible minimum version that you can for your binary, and this allows for me to share this across different, with the community, right? So, it's independent from the binary version, but each binary version has a minimum schema version. Immediately under that, we're going to have the event filtering tag, right? So we're going to specify the schema version and the Sysmon tag, and then the event filtering tag. And then within the event filtering tag, we're going to have what's called event tags. And this is where the meat and potatoes, these next two tags are the meat and potatoes on the filtering itself. And you can, in the event tags, we're going to match on certain events, and we're either going to include or exclude. When you include event, you only capture the events that you're filtering on. When you exclude an event, you capture all events except for what you're filtering on. So include captures only, exclude captures everything but. Okay, and you can actually nest these together. We'll take a look at an example of that. So what can we match on? What are the things we can match on? Again, these are the actual Sysmon events. Those are the event IDs that get generated.
Now these are very, very different from things like your system event logs, right? Because these are very security focused, very security related. Most of these have an adversarial or an event that has the potential for a malicious attack or some sort of thing happening on your computer that you want to know about that is well outside of the event log. So there's nothing in here that usually overlaps from event log standpoint, correct?
Right. You'll see that, like, the big obvious glaring one is process created. Like, all right, we see that. But one of the things that Sysmon provides that the traditional Windows events doesn't on process creation is that command line argument, right? Which is very, very powerful and useful from a threat hunting standpoint. And matter of fact, that's the event ID 1 and the event ID 3s are where I do most. I shouldn't say I focus on, but those tend to be the most useful, the network connection. But it gives you that command line argument. You can actually see, and we'll show some examples of that when we get to know Sysmon and understand the data, that you're going to get a lot more visibility. All right, process created, we can see that. I believe it's going to be in one of the Windows security events. But one of the things it gives you, it says this process was created, but it doesn't give you that command line argument. We'll take a look, and we'll when we get to learn about Sysmon and understand the data, we'll take a look at that and why that varies from your traditional Windows events.
And they actually have expanded on some of these events, and they are continually moving forward with some of these. One of the ones that someone mentioned in the Discord that we've commonly used is the DNS one, which
Correct.
helps you correlate and find those anomalies within inside of a record request, quadruple A record request, the things that are used for DNS beaconing. So as you begin to deploy this, keep an eye on the updates, make sure you're looking at your configs and following along with what gets processed and different new additions that get added.
Good catch. So this talk was originally created right when the pandemic. I was supposed to do it at B-Sides Charm. So this is the first place I've had the opportunity to present this. But no, great point. DNS always, especially from an endpoint standpoint, very, very important information. And you can actually, we'll talk about correlating too, but maybe not correlating the DNS, but correlating the DNS record back to the actual network connection and seeing what image is actually making that connection out to that DNS record. But yeah, valid point. This is always being updated. I believe they're up to version 13 right now. But yes, great point. And also, not only are the events changing, but also the fields within the events are changing as well. They're adding more and more of the fields within the event. So again, this is continuously, those guys, they do a great job over there. Put out such great products for the blue teamers.
Yeah, and I mean, if you've ever tried to configure actual just plain DNS logging on Windows, it's a disaster.
Correct. Right.
And Sysmon makes it so easy.
Correct. So again, so this event tag, so we have our Sysmon tag with our Schema version. We're going to have our event filtering tag, and then we're going to have our event tag. And in this case, we're going to filter on network events or network connection events, and we're going to exclude. So we're going to capture all the network connection events except for whatever fields we specify. And that's where we get into the field tag. And in here, you're going to have these field tags vary from event to event. Like we mentioned earlier, these fields are continuously changing all the time, just like the actual event IDs and these new features that they're adding in. These are the conditional operators. They're pretty self-explanatory. And what does this look like? So here we go ahead. We're going to have our Sysmon tag. We're going to have our Schema version. We're going to have our event filtering tag. We're going to have our network event, exclude events where the image contains MSEdge. So we're going to capture all network events except for network connections where the image or the process image is MSEdge. Here's another example. Again, we're going to have our Sysmon tag with our Schema version, event filtering tag. We're going to have the event tag drivers load. We're going to exclude events where the driver load where the signature contains Microsoft.
Maybe you want to do an includes driver contains NVIDIA as of recent.
Right. Well, this should capture, but yeah, one of the things to be careful with the include, and remember, it's only going to capture the stuff that has that. It's not going to capture anything else, right? So, you know, it's you know, well, I'll show you an example, very specific. But yeah, include it can be you know, I call it the this is where it gets confusing with people and understanding this, but I call it the Vincini, right? Vincini from Princess Bride. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. I've written configuration files for Sysmon thinking I'm gonna, and then I miss stuff, right? So, you know, really understand that. Just don't go grab a configuration file from GitHub. And this is true with anything from GitHub. Just don't go grab it and implement it. Take a look at it, understand it, dissect it. But yes.
How granular can you get with things like the driver? Can you do an include and then an exclude and do an include that has a driver version number, signature hash, all of those particular pieces that would allow you to identify very specific things like compromised drivers?
I don't know, like if there's a thumbprint or anything like that, right? Or a specific, right? The answer is I don't know. Again,
you can do the hash, or you can do the thumbprint, or you can do
correct.
by manufacturer on the driver. I don't know. I was just curious.
Yeah, and I great question. The answer is I'm not sure, uncertain. But I will make note of it, and I'll run some tests here and see what I can do.
I also wondered, have you ever seen? Because I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting to see. And not to give Tyler any ideas, but for like red teamers or attackers or whatever, to look at the actual, you know, configuration file and be like, oh, okay, well, you're excluding anything that contains Microsoft, or you're excluding anything that,
right,
you know, and actually working against the things that you're trying to not log on because they're too noisy.
Correct. And you're right. So the answer is yes. That's just simple -C, right? So so Sysmon, we'll talk about that when it gets installed, but if you go to so Sysmon gets put into C Windows or Windows directory, and then if you do the -C flag, it'll tell you how it's configured. It'll actually, if the XML file is still there, it'll tell you where it was ran from, right? So, and that -C will actually give you your filter too, and we'll take a look at that. It'll tell you what if we're logging network, what hashes we're calculating, all that stuff. So yes,
that is included in many kits. We do that for EDR, we do that for Sysmon, we do that for event forwarder. So seatbelts and stuff. It's definitely part of it. So it is a very good thing to have, and you don't want to not have it there. But it also does provide some insight into how well the organization is maturing and how they're actually doing their logging collection.
And that brings up a great
Sysmon-C.
And that brings up a great question or a great point that people always make about, like, while I have an EDR solution, I have Defender for endpoint. Why do I need Sysmon, right? Belts and suspenders, right? It's free. If you can get it into Sentinel, let's say you have Defender or whatever your SIM may be, you know, any of these, any additional layers of detection is always good from that standpoint, because you do have people like Tyler and these people who are, you know, that are very good at not being detected. and you want to make sure that the more cats you have guarding a window, the better the window is going to be protected, right? So here's another example. Again, we're going to start with our Sysmon tag, schema version, event filtering tag, and then we're going to go with the event tag process created. We're going to exclude where the image contains C Windows, CCM, CCM eval, all your SCCM processes, right? Do we want to know every time SCCM spins up a process? Probably not. SCCM can be quite noisy. Here's another example where we're getting granular about the includes and excludes. So here we're going to have our schema version again. We're going to have our event filtering tag. We're then going to have the same event tag, but one's going to be include, one's going to be exclude. And this one will look for very specific things, right? So in the first one, it's going to be network connection, include only the network connection events where the destination port is 443 and 80, so our standard HTTP and HTTPS ports. And then we're going to then from those logs that we're capturing, only those event logs, we're going to exclude anything that's going to be with the process image that is the path to Chrome. So we're going to only capture 443.80 for processes that are not Google Chrome, right? So very, very specific. So this is how they would work together. So first we're going to include only the ones only what we want to capture, and then we're going to exclude any of the noise. So additional tags, we didn't talk about them. These are optional. One of the ones that most people take a look at is that hash algorithm. Default is SHA-256. And you know, again, right there, if you take a look at the sys internal link right there, you can look up more on that for you if you would like.
And we had a question kind of around the ability for filtering and searching logs once they make it into the computer or to the Sysmon. Like it does become a pain to kind of filter. They were asking about graphs to import some of that too. And I do know that you can get these logs into something like Sentinel-1. You can ingest them into a Kibana stack, so like an elk log stack, and you can build graphs and dashboards around these. So yes, absolutely, the filtering and doing it from the computer to get, you know, more graphical user insights into what's being sent in raw text and logs is definitely possible, as well as leveraging things like PowerShell or even the security logs themselves for good filtering. You can get very granular with that filtering with some of the custom
and we'll show us further in the talk a couple of ways we can go about doing that. We'll talk about, so one of the things is CLIs, right? So I always say get to know thy data, run it through a CLI, right? Twofold, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but twofold, the reason why you want to do that is, one, you get to know the data. Like, it also, I know a lot of instances where I've had to go to and do IR on, where you're eventually parsing via a CLI. You're parsing logs via a CLI. You don't want to be there, but it's not uncommon, right? And the other reason why you want to learn how to parse stuff through a CLI is because you look cool doing it, right? So, those are the twofold things. But we can talk about where we can do that via. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about event forwarding and setting up subscriptions. And there's another point where you can get very, very specific on what events you want to send before you actually send it to your final destination. And we'll actually show you. And we won't get into how we got it up there, but we'll show you this actually integrated in a sim and how we can then use our host-based event to pivot to the PCAP of the host-based event, right? And we'll show you that. So again, optional tags. So how do we install this? We go to that link down there below. We grab it, we unzip it, we grab our flavor, either 64-bit or just regular old 32-bit. We accept the EULA, -I for install, -N for L, or -N for network connections. Network events aren't logged by default. They may be now on the newer ones, but I don't still think they are. And I know for sure the -L, which are images loaded by a process, right? Those are going to be your process modules. Very cool, very powerful, very noisy. So make sure that you have a good configuration on that. But also too, you'll be able to see stuff that a lot of red teamers think you won't have the ability to see. So how do we check the config? This answers Amanda's question. How you can just run this, go to see Windows, red teamers, here you go. See if Sysmon's installed, do a -C and it'll tell you how it's configured. And heck, if they don't do cleanup and they have their configuration file still on disk, which they probably will, go ahead and grab it, and then you can see specifically how you want to craft this.
Yeah, definitely detect on that command being run.
Right. Right. So how do we collect these events, right? So how do we go about doing this? And we're going to talk, now that we have Sysmon deployed, how do we aggregate these, right? We can drop an agent on every system in our environment, but that can be a bit to manage, right? But there's benefits to that, and there's disadvantages to it. One, the disadvantage being that you need to deploy that universal forwarder or WinLog Beats or whatever your data shipper is onto each endpoint. The benefit of it is now if you have a SaaS solution, let's say, as soon as your system connects to the internet, you're getting events, which is cool and powerful. But in our case, we're going to use two free mechanisms that are in Windows that are relatively easy to implement. And those two mechanisms, those two mechanisms are WinRM, right? And WinRM is the specification that Windows Event Forwarding uses. So WinRM is Microsoft's implementation of web services or web service for management or WS management. This is their implementation of it. And a lot of people, you hear this, maybe not so much anymore, but this was quite common several years ago, that WinRM is evil. And so we'll first talk about WinRM. That's the specification we need to do the event forwarding. So WinRM is evil. Why is it evil? PowerShell remote administration. The bad guys are going to abuse this. And my response is always no more than they abuse any other Windows protocol that we use to manage an environment, right? SMB, right? WMI, right? We still use WMI, right? All these other RDP, right? Like all these other protocols that we use to remotely administer an environment are being abused at way higher rates than WinRM or PS remoting. That's probably because WinRM isn't enabled. But bad guys are not going to abuse this any more than they would any other protocol. If we're concerned about WinRM and PS remoting, then we should get rid of all these other remote protocols as well. But I don't think WinRM is evil. I just think it's misunderstood, right? So it's going to use HTTPS, Kerberos authentication, firewalls, right? So if I take away PS remoting from my system administrator, what are they going to do? They're going to go get PS exec, and they're going to use SMB, right? And then they're going to use SMB, right? And depending on how they're authenticating to that session, you could be worse off, right? Depending on how they're authenticating to that PS exec session, right? Where if you're using WinRM, it's using Kerberos, as long as you're not using some busted ciphers, you're good. Well, I shouldn't say that. To my knowledge, you're good. But as long as you're not using but we have HTTPS. You can actually get really granular on these listeners, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next screen. But then Kerberos, and then we set up the firewall. So how do we go ahead about doing this? We're going to create a GPO, and you can actually enable WinRM via the group policy itself, but one of the problems is you can't get very detailed on setting up these listeners. So I recommend creating a PowerShell script. If you see that link down there, you can get very granular in what you want to do with it. You can actually specify what certs you want to listen on, what the URI is, what ports, and all this. We're going to keep it very simple. We're going to do WinRM, quick config, and we're going to set the transport to HTTPS. The default's going to be HTTP. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily insecure. It's just we want to add that extra layer. So,
also,
and then the other
also a good idea to ensure that any scripts you are running via your sysvol as part of a GPO, just good hygiene. These should be set up. They should have some granular configs around the local firewalls for the hosts they're going to. These can be pushes to your forwarding or event server, but you can also sign these PowerShell scripts and get these PowerShell scripts so that they're not getting modified and you're alerted on the modification. So there's a lot of good ways to do this. This is how Active Directory is done well and done right. It is at layers of defense in depth and ensuring that each of these aspects that could be abused, you have a mitigating or compensating control put in place to combat those.
Right, and good points. Sending out these scripts, signing them, doing things right, and then saving it to the sys file. So we save it there. So then we go ahead and we're going to go ahead and open up GPO at manager, and we're going to create a GPO. Name said GPO. We're then going to edit it, and then we're going to navigate to computer config, control panel settings, schedule task immediately, right? Name that bad boy. We're going to go ahead and go to actions, new, browse to our sysval, and grab that PS1 script. We're then going to go over to the commons and just run once. We don't need, and then do not reapply. We don't need to run this all the time. Once it's set up, it's set up. So now that we have Sysmon deployed, it's configured, we're getting all our good events on all the endpoints. We have WinRM enabled, so we can do the event forwarding now. So we're good, right? So now we have to set up our Windows event forwarding. And there's actually two types of Windows event forwarding. There's source initiated, and then there's destination initiated. And we're going to talk about just the source initiated, because in a Windows Active Directory environment, this is the preferred, recommended, and easiest way to set up this event forwarding. So event forwarding, source initiated subscription. We have two people in this conversation, and the sources, there'll be multiple of them, but ultimately there's two people in this conversation. You have a source, and then you have a collector, right? And so the way the conversation works is the source is the one that actually initiates this conversation. Basically, the source says, hey, what logs do you want? The collector says, Sysmon, please. And the source says, here you go. This collector can say whatever he wants. You can actually, let's say you can't get Sysmon deployed in your environment, right? That's difficult. But why would you not, one thing I recommend is doing event forwarding. You can get very granular on what events you want to do, like we were talking earlier. You can actually send security event logs, events 4624, 4625, what is it, 4732s, which is like users added to local security groups, right? Do you know who, when, and what account was added to a local administrator group on a laptop, right? Odds are probably not, right? With this, you're aggregating events without actually deploying agents out to all your endpoints. So no universal forwarder deployed, no WinLog beats agents deployed. You're just setting up a group policy to forward these security events. So in this demo, we're just specifically talking about Sysmon, but you can also set up Windows security event logs, any PowerShell logs, whatever, I shouldn't say logs, whatever events that Windows can generate, you can send these off to a collector, aggregate them, and then bring them up to your log or your SIM, right? So here you go. So what does this look like? We're gonna go ahead and set up our collector first. Typically, this is gonna be a Windows Server box. It could be Windows 10 Enterprise. But what we wanna do is we open up Event Viewer, create subscription, right? We're then gonna do source initiated subscription, select our computers. We're gonna do domain join computers. You can do non-domain join computers, but now you have to manually configure these systems, right? To come talk to the collector, and then you also have to do the certificate escrow yourself, right? So you have to actually deploy these certificates. But if it's just a domain, if it's an Active Directory domain, your PKI set up the way it should be, you should just be able to do domain computers, and it will then allow these systems to authenticate to your collector. We're then going to go back out. We're going to click OK on all that. We're going to go ahead and select events. And this is where another place where we can filter out what events we want. In this case, we're going to do it by source. We're going to select Sysmon. We're just going to gather all Sysmon events. We can actually specify specific event IDs if we wanted to. Click OK on that. And then what will end up happening is these events will start showing up in that forwarded events within Windows logs. So now that our collector is set up, we're going to have to set up our sources. So that we're going to go ahead and go back into our group policy that we created earlier. We're then going to go to computer configs, admin templates, Windows component, and event forwarding. We're going to go ahead and enable the target subscription manager. We're then going to go into subscription managers, and we're going to click on the shell. We're going to add that string right there that says server equals HTTPS, because that's what we set our transport up to. Again, depending on how you set up your PowerShell script, these may be different. But we're going to put the FQDN or the IP address of our collector. Tell it the default port for HTTPS for WinRM is going to be 5986. And then WSMan, subscription manager, WEC. Click OK and all that and apply. So now our group policies. Yep.
One question from the audience too, like as you are doing and setting up a lot of your WinRM, that is just one way to kind of skin this cat. And WinRM does have the ability to get very granular with security, things like public key encryption or certificates. On top of that, you also have the ability to leverage things like the Windows firewall that is deployed through GPO. With the Windows firewall, you can get super granular, you know, coming from this computer with this IP address at this time on this port with this hash of this particular process, it can make a connection only to this computer outbound for this much time, pushing, you know, this kind of data. Like the Windows firewall looks very simple above the covers. You get below the covers and you start deploying stuff via GPO, you can get very, very granular. In fact, you can build TLS tunnels between hosts to pass information, all stood up with certificates and private public keys. So this is definitely just one way, and keep in mind that the resources that are leveraged or being used for this is very, very low because it is using built-in Windows APIs, and they're pushing those into the native from, you know, how the OS is configured is pushing natively into the event forwarders. And you have other things like NX logs or WinLog beats that can also be leveraged for larger scale deployments that is a little bit less resource intensive and can push very, very large amounts of collected data, you know, hundreds of clients into your collectors, which then gets pushed up to your SIM. So we're definitely demonstrating one very standard and very common way of deploying this based on, you know, how big or how much you're trying to play with this. But there are a lot of other ways. Don't take this as the only way to kind of get this up and going and set up. This scales very well and is very well done. This is just getting you an understanding of what components are needed to actually get events moving. And you can do this in different ways. There's some, in fact, Amanda, your company just put out some info on this very recently, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, it could be used like along with all of this stuff too. So like it's just a PowerShell script that downloads, installs Sysmon, and we use NX log instead of WEF. But we do have some customers that use WEF too. So it's definitely depends on the inside of the organization, right? Like if you may already have WEF set up, and if you do, why install other agents, right? But yeah, totally agree. There's a whole wide range of stuff out there, but this is good as, yeah, this is a good way to set up that event forwarding.
Yeah, and yeah, again, all awesome. Thank you guys. And you know, I've been in, and the question is, what's the best way to go about doing this? And again, it depends, right? If you don't know the best, and I shouldn't say this, but I will. If you don't know your environment well enough to know how to collect events, you should spend the time to get to know your environment, right? And what's going to work best for you.
That's the best consultant answer I've heard all day. It depends.
Yeah, right? All the time.
So here we go. So let's get to know Sysmon. So one of the things, like we touched on earlier, is a lot of times people will just take logs or events and throw them into a SIM and be like, we're done, right? But they don't really know what's in there. They don't know what's part of those, what the data consists of. And we're going to go through PowerShell here, and you know, like I said earlier, just because you have a SIM doesn't mean you're never going to have to parse logs via the CLI. Almost every place I've been, I've had to parse via the CLI. It's getting a little bit better, but we're going to get to know our data a little bit, and we're going to talk about this commandlet right here, this get when event commandlet. And super easy. We're going to look at this one right here. We're going to say get when event pointed at the Sysmon log, and do a format list and list out all the properties. We're also going to implement what we call a filter hash table, and this will help perform the performance of this. And it creates a hash table for the Windows event. So we're going to go ahead, hash table. We're going to specify what log we want, and then filter out for event ID 1. Event ID 1 is going to be process created. So we got a little bit of PowerShell here. We're going to take our C line 1 right there. We're going to take our Windows event, Sysmon event ID 1s. We're going to put them into an event variable. PowerShell it has them, but by default, it has what they call objects. So they're not like tuples or dictionaries or anything. They're actual objects with properties. We're going to run that each one of those window event ones through a for loop. We're going to pull out the command line argument. And again, this is where Sysmon's powerful. And then we get our first look. We're going to filter on, do an if statement, say, hey, if you see Powershell flag. And very easy, simple, right? One of the things that's powerful is that command line argument, right? And process created. We don't see that unless you have a ADR solution. Here's another one, process created from a non-OS drive. Again, we're going to pull EventID 1 out, put it into a variable, run it through a for loop, pull out the command line. And then we're going to do CMD, not C. And then we're going to put it out to an out file, or output it to a text file. I have done this in the past, not so much in the last few years, but I've done it where I haven't had a SIM and I've had to put stuff out to flat files and just have them emailed to myself and have them in my mailbox in the morning. Smaller organizations, but this is, you know, not that long ago. This was stuff that was being done. At least I was doing it. So we're going to take a look at this. We're going to take a look at this text file. We're going to grab this bad process ID or this process ID. We see that it's running 1.exe from the E drive. Again, this is from 2018. So we're going to be looking at examples I've been going over the last few years. And we're going to make reference that we're going to make note of that 2916 process ID. And again, in 2018, people were still using thumb drives, not so much anymore, kind of. Maybe it was a CD drive, probably not. But we're not running, you know, is it unusual for a process running from not C drive? If it's a server, no, but if it's a laptop, I would argue yes. You shouldn't see that all that often, unless it's even a network share, you shouldn't see it. So we're actually going to go ahead and this time grab EventID 3, which is network connections. We're going to go ahead and run that through a for loop. We're going to pull out the process ID. We're then going to look for the process ID that we think is suspicious. And now we have EventID 3. We see that it matches our process ID, and we have see that it is creating a network connection out. We also get a little bit more information. If you actually look at the process, we get what the product is and the vendor and all that good stuff too, and who ran it. Here's another example. This time, process ID. We're going to look at the command line again. That command line argument is very powerful, and this is something that we should be looking at. We're looking for execution policy bypass. This is not necessarily a great detection rule because it seems like every system administrator runs that switch. But you know,
yes. 100% correct. Every application, every sysadmin, every MSP.
I think Windows Defender runs it too, right? No, but
it does. It totally does. And SentinelOne and literally.
Again, but you know, it's that, you know, if you can put some kind of if you can put some kind of app control in here. Actually, with Defender, you can block this, right? You can create a custom detection rule to say don't allow this, and then you can force your system. You'll probably get a lot of rabble. But that's anyways. Back to it. Download string, same thing. EventID 1. We're going to take a look at the command line again. Again, command line arguments, very, very powerful. Download string, invoke web requests, byte stream, all these good ones that we see that we should not see.
And again, from one of the audience questions that we somewhat alluded to earlier, this is one great way to interact and correlate with the logs. It gets you to understand what logs are being pushed in there, what key fields are available, what information you can get very, very granular, you know, from this process ID during this time if you're doing some threat hunting or, you know, this particular user that was compromised. You can get very granular with this, but you also have the ability to leverage a lot of those GUI tools. If you're not comfortable with PowerShell or the command line, like don't let that be a barrier entry. You've got things like Sentinel-1 where you can build dashboards around this. You got KQL query, you can build dashboards around this, and there's a lot of pre-populated ones that are already available from most of the vendors. You've got things like Elk Stack with your Kibana. You can build mini dashboards with that and have those pre-populated. So don't let the command line scare you away. It's very good to get to know your environment and look at the field types and what info you're getting, but it's also very easy to have some of these pre-populated and have some nice graphical GUIs that you can leverage day to day.
Yep, and we'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at a SIM. I have Security Onion. Security Onion will ingest this and have pre-built dashboards and alerts around Sysmon as well, right? And we'll take a look at that. Moving on, this time we're going to go ahead and pull out EventID 1. We're going to look for WScript. right? So VBS, right? Macros are the new cool kids on the block again, right? So WScript running a file from C users. We're going to actually take this. One of the things that EventID 1 also gives you is that parent process command line as well, right? So we're going to take the same string and run that through the parent command line process, right? So the parent process is WScript running from C users. Now we get PowerShell as the command line, but we look at that current working directory from the command line argument. We see some Base64 string. Now again, in and of itself, is this suspicious? Maybe. If it's a VBS script running, I would say yes, but there are legitimate uses of seeing some Base64 on command lines. But we're gonna keep moving past this. We're gonna make reference of that process ID of 1412 right there. And we're gonna go ahead and this time we're gonna grab that 1412 process ID. We're gonna pull out the parent process ID and match it against 1412. And this time we actually see some kind of persistence here too. Look at that command line argument, scheduled tasks, right? We can actually see what VBS script or what the scheduled task command line is. And we can actually, from a forensic standpoint, now we have artifacts we can go grab. We'll grab that VBS script, right? From a IOC standpoint, we have a TTP here, guys. We're right at the top of the pyramid. We can go grab this, go across our entire enterprise and look for scheduled tasks and running this Windows indexing service.vbs or mapping to that. We're also going to take that process ID. We're going to go ahead and grab EventID 3s, which are network connections. We're going to then look for that process ID for network connections. And now guys, we have another IOC. And this one is, I get that it's an IOP and it's smaller, lower on the pyramid, but this is a very good, unique IOC for our environment now. Now we have the IP address of a bad guy, right? We can then take this and see what other systems connected to this IP address, right? So one of the things I always say from a threat hunting standpoint is we don't look for IOCs, we create IOCs, right? We find IOCs, so that's what we're doing here. We found one with the command line argument, and now this time we found one lower, a little bit lower on the pyramid, but still very useful in our environment. Another act, this one's Drydex, again, macros, cool and sexy. This one we're gonna grab two aspects, the command line and the parent command line. Parent command line contains WinWord, command line contains PowerShell. Word is the parent process for PowerShell, typically not good. Excel, the parent process for PowerShell, typically not good. In our current directory there, we have some Base64. We can grab that, do static analysis on it. Again, this is what we were talking about earlier, disabling this stuff, disable real-time monitoring. This is TrickBot. It also disables Windows Defender. And then finally, it was TrickBot. We're going to go ahead and a little bit, we're going to get away from process ID 1s and 3s. We're going to look at EventID 2, file created. File created, one of the things I really like using this for, and I don't have this in my demo, is looking at your web application, making sure that files aren't created in your web application directories, right? If they are, we want to be told about it. Hunting, we shall go. We're going to go ahead and move into a live demo now. We're going to show you how. All right, so now that we understand the data, we've aggregated the data. Now we drop our agent or our universal forwarder onto our collector, and we're going to send it up to our SIM. And log collecting and a SIM are not the same thing. A SIM will generate alerts. It will also, and then let me know when we got it. You guys see our Elastic Security Onion. Cool. So yeah, so we have Security Onion. Again, everything I'm showing here today, this is the GUI that Tyler was talking about. Everything I'm showing here today is free. So Security Onion is free. You can buy support, but the product itself is free. And they put together all these great dashboards and easy, within half a day, you can be up monitoring your network and then sending Sysmon events up to this. So this is the default.
It also does not take a ton of resources. One of the audience questions was the forwarders, the collectors. Most of those don't take hardly any resources. Very, very little storage. You're talking about text logs that are highly condensed. The SIM and the monitoring really depends on your traffic flow, how much throughput you need, and how many events you're collecting from how many endpoints. But overall, for small to medium business, even home networks, you can run this on as low as a Raspberry Pi. I don't really suggest that, but there's a lot of configurations that I've seen that utilize very, very limited hardware in order to do this. So if you want to build a lab, look at this, you can run this in just about anything.
So, right, and so I've been in organizations where we've done this, and they're probably about 1,000 endpoints, which is medium, mid to medium, maybe smaller. You can buy a pretty beefy server for 10 grand, so 10 grand, right, hardware wise. And you'll have the functionality, which I'll show you here in the live demo, right, between Sysmon and one of the things Security Onion does is it does Brozeek, it does Suricata straight out of the box. It does a bunch of other stuff too, but we'll show you the correlation process, and you'll have this nice GUI interface. But so here we are with Security Onion. We're going to go ahead and add a couple filters here. We're going to do the Sysmon filter since that's what we're talking about today, and we're going to do the network connections, right? Because that's what we've been focused on. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on these, and we're going to pin across all apps so these stay where they need to stay. And then we have these nice interfaces, but down here is the meat and potatoes of the logs. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go into the Discover. I'm going to open these up in Discover because I only care about the logs. I'm threat hunting now, right? So I want to get down into the weeds. I don't want higher level. We have, some stuff here, some fields. I'm going to add one field, which is going to be the process execution. We're going to go ahead and add that to a column here. I'm going to get rid of this.
If you really want to get into some of the Security Onion things too, I also suggest you register for the next webinar that Paul's going to be doing is with the creator of Security Onion. We're really going to dive into some of the depths of this. So these two actually play very well together and come pre-configured set up with things that take you, if you don't have some of this pre-configured and built out of Security Onion, I've spent several days doing this, building it to get to this point. So definitely stay tuned for that one.
Yeah, Security Onion is great. I've been a big fan. I met Doug once years ago at a SANS SOC conference or summit. Nice guy. He actually talked to me, which is cool. No, but great products. Even back when he was just doing it for funsies, it was still a like if anybody has tried to like set up PF Ring on it in and of themselves, that can be a bear to actually get to be stable, right? So, anyways, so we have so now what we have here are network connections, and this is cool, right? We have source desks, and then we have actually what the process was that created it, right? That's cool. But we still have several thousand events. So one of the things I like to do for threat hunting, and this is KQL, right? We talked about this a couple weeks ago with Sentinel, but same type of concept. One of my low-hanging fruit for threat hunting is network connections that the process is running in a temp directory. And we're going to go ahead and run this, and then we've just filtered it down to seven events, right? And here they are. And so one of the things we can open up these events, right? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. We can look at them in here too, right? So we see this event, this PS exec event. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and it's running from a temp directory. We talked about what that is, and it allows you to, run stuff over SMNB. Well, we see that this is running from C user JD app data local temp, but the user running it is this C stole. Like, oh, that's interesting, right? Why is he running it from somebody else's directory? So what we can actually do here is if we scroll back up, we can actually, this is one of the things I was saying, where a SIM allows you to correlate and pivot, right? If we right here on this pivot and optional or hunt and optionally pivot to PCAP, we're going to go ahead and click on that. We're going to right click on it and open up in a new tab. We're going to go ahead and move into the Security Onion Hunt tab. And in here, we have our same event that we brought into here, but what we can do is anywhere on here, we can left click and we can go to actions and we can go to hunt. And what this will now do is this will hunt across all my logs for this period of time and come back with whatever events, that it triggers on it. It looks like we have, process creation, terminated network connections. And we can actually see the network connections. Again, there's a C stall. One of the things we don't have is any PCAP for this. And we know this because these are all host-based events. We're not seeing any events that are being created from any type of packets. So, but it's very suspicious that this PS exec, this remote tool, is being ran by the C stall from somebody else's directory. So we're kind of at a dead end here, but we'll go back. We'll go ahead and go back and we'll take a look at some of these other processes. And we see the C stall again, all right? That guy was kind of suspicious before, right? And what we're going to do is we see that he's running again from cstol, this time app data local temp, and we see SV host, right? So I don't know what SV host is. Never seen that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pivot to the hunt. And we have our process executed right here, this process executable. We're going to do the same thing here. We're going to left click on it. We're going to go to actions, and we're going to go to hunt. And now now Security Onion will go out and look across all the things it knows about this SV host running from that directory. And we have a couple more. We have our normal Sysmon events, but now we have some Suricata alerts. Interesting, right? And we can actually scroll down and we can take a look at some of these events, right? And we have some, right? So one of the things that really kind of bothers me in a lot of SIM implementations, they have Suricata, they have Snark, and you get these alerts, but there's no context around these alerts. Like something happened, like, all right, or this is a false positive, or a DOS prompt. We saw this C stole running PS exec earlier. It doesn't mean it's anything unusual. The destination port's a little bit unusual, but what we can actually do with Security Onion, again, we can click on this event. Since we know this event was generated from PCAP, we can left click on it, go down to the actions and go to the PCAP. And we pivot straight to the PCAP. So we went from a host-based event of a suspicious process running from a temp directory to the actual PCAP we correlated it back to the PCAP of that host-based event. And we're taking a look here, and he gets in, he says, who am I, priv, all right, he's trying to figure out who he is or who he's running at. Then he does a net group domain admins, right, and he gets an error, and then he does some RTFM, and then he puts his quotes around it, right, and he actually dumps the domain administrators of this Fentech account, right? So we see this Fentech account. And then we see this right here, right? We see this add MP preferences. I'm not sure what that is. It errors on him, says this command line's not found, and then he goes over to PowerShell and he sees it again. One of the things you can do in Security Onion, which is kind of cool, is you can actually highlight any text in here. Let me highlight it, and let me get it.
This is super granular and high visibility things that you would otherwise not be able to see without a very, very expensive SIM. And even then, even an EDR, you're going to get what they filter out and how they display that with inside of the GUI, and maybe that misses it, maybe it doesn't. Those are all huge pieces. I mean, something like add MP prefs, where you're adding exclusion in Defender, is a really big indicator of some malicious activity. That's really hard.
Right. You stole my thunder, Tyler. I was going to show highlight it, and then we can actually Google any text we actually highlight in Security Onion. You can Google straight on, right?
Beautiful.
Right. So you know, people are like, SOAR, you know, how do I do my research? Like, I Google 90% of my stuff, right? But you can do that with it. And then, so we see add exclusion, right? So we see here that we see that this MP is add an exclusion or modify settings in Windows Defender. So now he's adding this exclusion pass of $3, right? We then see he does an invoke web request for this Mimi casting. So what is this? Again, we can highlight any one of these texts, go to Google, will pop right up. What is Mimikatz, right? We see that it's used to steal credentials, right? And we keep going through. We see that he creates a directory, right? He then expands the update.1, which is what he named that Mimikatz file to, that zip file. He then works his way into that directory. He then tries to run it, gets an error, says command line's not found, right? Moves back over to CMD, back over to the command line, goes into that directory, this time is able to run Mimikatz. Here's that Sventech account, that domain administrator that we saw above. We see that he gets the NTLM hash of it, right? And he gets a bunch of other stuff from Mimikatz, right? And leaves Mimikatz. Then he goes back into, and he starts trying to use this Sventech account to map the admin share. Apparently he doesn't know what the admin share is because he's not putting it in correctly. Keeps trying. This time he provides a password, right? LBL 1986, right? So from there, so we know that he identified the domain administrator. We saw that he was able to get the NTLM of it. Odds are, right, he was able to figure out what that password is, right? And then he does a net use, he RTFMs again, and he's moving around. This time, he's going to keep, so this time he maps the C to that external drive using this Fentech account, right? Now he's moving, then he copies the SV host. He moves into what he just mapped. Then he copies the SV host over to the C drive of that remote host, and then he disconnects. So as you can see, we went from a suspicious one event on and this is the power of a SIM, right? You went from one event, a host-based event, and you moved into the actual PCAP of that event from a host-based event, from a suspicious process that was created, right? So the network connection may not look suspicious in and of itself, right? The process execution does look suspicious, right? So if the host base, or if the network base, like that Saricata alert comes in, we saw that the alert was, a DOS prompt, which may or may not be malicious. But then we got there by going from a suspicious process event, or suspicious network process event from the endpoint. So we're going to go ahead and move back to our presentation, right? So that's it as far as the live demo goes, right? And I'm going to give a couple shout out here. So SysInternals, they're the ones that put out Sysmon, great product, awesome. Say on Sec 530, I took the course. Ismael Venezuela put this challenge out here: make the blue team better, make the community better. I hope I did that today. I hope you guys learned something. I hope that this was useful to you and you didn't waste your time. Security Onion, they're the ones that provided us this awesome SIM that took absolutely no work to set up. And they're the ones that we use in the live demo. And then Security Weeklies. Thank you guys, putting out great products for years. I appreciate all you do. I thank you for this opportunity. A couple final thoughts.
We have a couple questions, right?
Oh, we do. Yeah. We can get to we do have the question. We have the question for the card. A couple last thoughts. Sysmon, powerful, scalable, not a silver bullet. Again, it gives you greater visibility, but belts and suspenders are always good. More detection is always better. Resources, right? Additional resources. Now the next slide is the question. Should I go ahead and go to it?
Well, that's up to you. You can
up for the gift card. All right. So this is going to be for the gift card, guys. All right. So everybody's ready. Keyboards are at the ready, right? So we're going to have the question. The first one to answer. I'll put the Discord up. First one to answer gets the gift card, right? So to Hacker Warehouse, they're the one that are helping us put this on.
Google Windows are up.
Google Windows are up. That's right. In the live demo today, the attacker abused the account's Fentech. They didn't even finish the question. There we go. So it looks like Fly Eater. And if somebody wants to validate my assessment of that, looks like Fly Eater was the first one, right? What other story did the account's Fentech get abused in? And the answer, of course, is the cuckoo's egg, right?
That was fast. Very well done.
Yeah.
So
that's me.
And Fly Eater both hit that very close.
Yeah. So that's me. That's my website. There isn't much up there right now. I've been good about keeping up my blog. That's my email address. I'll put this deck back up there as a post, and then that's it. Any questions?
Excellent. We did have a question around Sysmon, since they released Sysmon for Linux. Does anybody know of the kind of Swift on security Sysmon config file that is similar for the Linux variant of that?
Yeah, I haven't looked into Sysmon for. I installed it. I played around with it. Audit D, like that's where I've been for Linux for years, right? Because, right, you can get very similar type stuff. But that's great questions. I've installed it in my lab. I've never installed it at a client or in production.
We'll respond. I know that there's a couple resources in one of my notes. I've got some things around OS Query. We leveraged OS Query for quite a while, but the Sysmon for Linux is kind of a newer thing. But there are config files out there. I've seen several very well done ones, maybe not quite as extensive as the Swift on security or some of the others. And there are other links within inside of Discord to some other config files that are very similar from the community that provide, you know, different or more features and configuration settings. So definitely check out Discord and follow up on those. And appreciate Alan and Amanda being here. It was a great time. This was very informative. We've got a lot of questions, a lot of resources we'll try and provide and follow up. So keep an eye on the Discord for any of the follow-up questions. And if we didn't answer that, please drop it in there. We'll try and respond to you accordingly. And if you guys need to find any of us, you can always reach us in the Discords, on Twitter. Obviously, Alan's got his email up on here. So come find us, come chat with us. We're very open to helping out the community however we can. And we appreciate you guys taking the time today. Thank you to Hacker Warehouse and Alan for being here, and Amanda for taking the time. With that, I think that concludes it. I think Johnny will have some wrapping thoughts, and we should be ending the webinar from there.